Welcome to The Self-Led Woman. This is a podcast about emotional eating, the experiences that shape our relationships with food, and the path back to self-leadership. These conversations go beneath behavior, held with deep respect for the wisdom of the body and the ways it learned to cope, adapt, and survive. And when we can peel back those layers and meet the parts of ourselves that need care, we begin to see that food was never the problem, and we can return to who we really are. I'm your host, Megan Darnell. Let's dive right in. So there's something that I keep seeing again and again in my work. I've seen it in my own journey, in my clients, and also in research. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. But that food isn't just regulating emotions. And this is super interesting. But sometimes food is holding family roles in place that never should have belonged to you. And when that's happening, there's no amount of awareness, insight, or discipline or nutrition plans that are going to help you here. Because it's not the actual behavior that's the issue, but it's the role, it's the job of that part. So let me explain this so this actually makes sense. So I was reading an IFS book lately, and the therapist in the book was describing a client that had bulimia. And what stood out to me wasn't the eating behavior, but it was actually the family system. So just to give you a little bit of background, internal family systems therapy, which is what I use with my clients, it was developed off the basis of two things. So Richard Schwartz was originally a family therapist. He literally used to work with families. And then he also looked into what was going on in families and then in individuals, because obviously each individual makes up a family. And then he also looked at systems theory and how systems are always working. They're a system. They work and they create outcomes. There are systems, family systems going on within us. But also there are systems going on within families. So this woman in this book that this therapist was referring to, she grew up involved in her parents' relationship. So her dad used to confide in her and was he talked to her instead of his wife. Not her job as a child. And then her mum, she was soothing her distress and being a caretaker as well, managing her emotions, which again is not her job. And then she was trying to keep the peace in the household. So she didn't get to be a child. She became this emotional buffer for her parents. And this happens all the time. We take on these roles in families to try and create balance or harmony or whatever, or just try and get our needs met. And this therapist was saying that this pattern they see, it's extremely common in their clients with bulimia. And bulimia, it's categorized as an eating disorder. I don't like to use the word disorder with anything because it's an adaptation. But when this therapist worked on this triangle in the therapy, and she was released from that role because she wasn't a child anymore. And once these parts of her recognized that she didn't need to continue to be this person for both her parents, the eating behavior subsided. The binge and purge cycle subsided. And I see this over and over again with clients as well. So what's actually happening here? When we grow up in these families, in these systems, your nervous system is doing something very specific. It's regulating other people. Again, not your job. But there's so much going on with that. You might not see it on the surface, but like you're tracking moods, you're managing tension, you're containing emotions, particularly as children, they're too big for the adults around you. They're too big for you too. And through an IFS lens, this will create these parts in us, managers, that are very hypervigilant. So then we go through life like always tracking every little detail. These clients tend to be very responsible, very in control, very capable, very, I got this. And most of my clients are like this, if not all. But then they have another type of part, which we call a firefighter. So there's managers and firefighters in IFS. But the firefighters come in when the managers have been working far too hard for far too long. And that's where the eating behaviors live, the ones that we feel that are sometimes out of control. This isn't about food addictions or lack of discipline. Food is the fastest way to discharge what we were never meant to carry. So when we're looking at like these push-pull cycles of like restricting and binging, or, being good and then emotionally eating, it's like you have some control and then it gets too much because it's like so tightly wound. Then we have relief. It's like holding it together, then getting it out. It's like this nervous system, like from this nervous system perspective, this makes complete sense. When you spend your childhood holding other people emotionally, not your job as a child, not your responsibility, you learn that like you need to do that for survival. Like you need to contain yourself, contain your emotions, control what's going on around you. But like any container, if you think of a container, I've got a glass of water here, it has a limit. You can only fill it up so much before it spills over. So when you emotionally eat, it's not a weakness. There's not something wrong, but the container has a limit. And it's like all of that control all day long has filled up that glass, and just one more drop, one more, I need to do this, one more feeling of responsibility it will make the glass overflow. It's your system. It's your very, very intelligent system saying, I can't hold this anymore. So the emotional eating isn't a self-destructive behavior or a self-sabotaging behavior like we might think. I do use those words, self-sabotage, sometimes, but it's not actually sabotage, it's adaptation. But it's your system's attempt to restore balance, to restore homeostasis, to restore some sort of equilibrium. It's not about the food. It's about you're carrying too much. You've been carrying too much for too long. So when we're looking at eating behaviors, like they serve different jobs in your system. So if you're restricting your food, that comes from a need for safety. And you get that through control. When your emotions feel chaotic or unsafe growing up, or just too much, like too overwhelming, having a binge or emotionally eating comes from like emotional deprivation or inconsistent attunement. Being alone inside connection. When I say being alone inside connection, I mean you have connection with people, but you can't truly be yourself. You can't actually say to them, hey, I feel this, or I need this. You are taught, or maybe not directly, you learn to suppress your own emotions. You learn to suppress your own needs for the sake of other people. And then these clients turn into women who are massive caretakers, who think they're responsible for everyone around them. They're responsible for their feelings, their behavior. And this also comes from, if you've had experiences as a child, we have these big caretaker parts that they feel responsible for everything and everyone, and they can tend to be people pleasing because of that. What they're holding is massive, but it's these experiences we have where our parents maybe hit us or punished us or yelled at us and then said to us, I only punished you because you were naughty. So the adult who's meant to be the responsible one is not taking responsibility for their behavior. They're blaming you for their behavior. It's one thing to say you were naughty, but it's another thing to say I only hit you because you were naughty. Therefore, you are responsible for me hitting you. And we learn that, then we become really responsible. We hold a high emotional load when we don't have an outlet. This is an adaptation of our system. It's so intelligent, but that might have served you when you're a little girl, but it's not serving you anymore. And to add to this point about when food is serving a purpose, I read something recently that said that people who feel addicted to sweet food, put your hand up if you've ever been there, me, absolutely, often grew up, and this might really land for you, it did for me, without enough love or softness. And while that can sound simplistic, it's actually very accurate. And this isn't to say that the people around you didn't love you. They could have loved you in the best way that they knew how. Most people are. But it just wasn't enough love or softness to meet your system. But sweetness activates soothing pathways in the brain. Things like dopamine, your opioid receptors, bonding chemistry, that beautiful oxytocin. Or if love for you is inconsistent, conditional, absent, or any combination of the above, then sweetness, sweet food becomes a substitute for that. And this isn't a conscious decision. This isn't about willpower. This is our body trying to get its needs met. And sometimes our tendency for sugar can feel like we're addicted. I've certainly been there. I used to tell people I'm addicted to food. I genuinely thought that, but looking back, I do not believe that to be true. There was just unmet needs underneath all of that. And when I speak to emotional eating, at the end of the day, you're emotionally eating because something isn't being met. And sometimes that's nutrition, actual nutrients in your food, but often it's something else. If you think that you're addicted to sugar, I want you to consider that you're not addicted to sugar, but you're hungry for love, for softness. And if you feel that, maybe just put a hand on your heart and use that hand to communicate to that part that you're here and they're not alone, that part that's craving softness or sugar or love. Maybe just send some softness towards it. So I want to speak to a big piece for me that gets missed in all of the mainstream conversations I hear about emotional eating, because it just feels to me so one-dimensional and so black and white. When food is helping you to regulate something that's relational, taking food away will not heal it. Having awareness or going, I emotionally eat after a hard day. Oh, okay, well, I'll just go chew a piece of gum or whatever. It doesn't heal it. You might do that today, but we need to heal what's underneath. It's requiring your attention. If food for you is carrying something like anger, grief, loneliness, or responsibility that was just never yours, then controlling food is just going to increase tension in your system. It's just going to increase tension in your body. So many women will say, I know exactly why I do it, or I understand that I emotionally eat after a really hard day at work, or if I have a fight with my partner. They know, they can pinpoint the exact trigger moments, but that doesn't change anything, because knowing doesn't actually help the parts of you to heal, to be updated, to release the roles that they're carrying, that they've been carrying for probably most of your life, for decades. The women I work with aren't, unaware. Like, they're incredibly smart and self-aware and high functioning and capable and holding a lot of responsibility. And they've spent their lives holding a lot of responsibility, holding everything together. But when we can slow down, and often women I work with, they haven't slowed down in such a long time, they learn that they're basically the emotional glue growing up. They held it together. Maybe they were peacekeepers. Maybe they didn't need too much, or they learned to, don't be too much. Don't be too sensitive. Don't be too loud. Don't bother your mom. She's really busy. She's really stressed. Maybe you were the helper. Maybe you were praised and given love and attention for being the helper. So food was the only place where you felt like you would get a little bit of relief or just an exhale. Again, a beautiful, clever, intelligent adaptation. So where IFS comes in, and this is where we can really truly start to make changes, it's not approaching this from like, oh, stop eating a certain way, stop emotionally eating. We'll ask, like, what is this behavior doing for you? What job is this behavior? What job is this part undertaking that believes that it still needs to be doing this job? And in a lot of my sessions, if you've ever done IFS therapy, a very common question that we ask when we're working with a part and getting to know it is, how old does this part think you are? And often the part might say 7 or something really, like a really young version. And it's like that part is frozen in time. It literally thinks that you're 7 or 5 and it still needs to be doing this job because there was no other way back then. And a big piece of this is updating the part. I often tell my clients to play the part a little movie of your life from 5 until now, just to bring it up to speed so it knows how old you are and how capable you are. And then for that part to consider, like, well, what would happen if you didn't have to do that job anymore? And when we work with these parts and they learn, like, that they're no longer responsible for keeping things together, or that they don't have to hold everybody anymore, your whole entire system will start to reorganize itself. Like, part by part, one session at a time, these parts, because there's never just one part that's emotionally eating. There's many parts in the system that are contributing to this behavior. And I often use my riverbed analogy, and I will say that again. When you have a riverbed, like, say, for example, it rains, the rain hits the mountains, it runs down the mountains, down into the river. And if you've ever seen a riverbed from a drone shot, how it travels over the land, and it will just forge its path over many, many years. And it's a system. It's always worked. That's where the river has gone. And when we decide, oh, I don't want to emotionally eat anymore, you have to actually create a new system in which for this to work. So it's to say, oh, I'm just going to follow the nutrition plan. Oh, I'm not going to eat emotionally anymore. I'm going to do something where I I don't know, close the kitchen off for the night or whatever after dinner, if that's your window where you tend to emotionally eat after a hard day. That's like standing in front of a riverbed and saying, don't flow here. And that might be fine on a week where there's no rain, aka there's no stress in your life. But if you're doing that and then there's a big storm or even a flood, the riverbed is going to get used again. The riverbed is your emotional eating, those patterns. We need to work with each part in the system that contributes to you using the riverbed when you're stressed or overwhelmed or feel like you're holding too much. And when we can update each part in the system and help them heal and release what they're carrying and then give them a new job, it's like being able to create a very clever stormwater drainage system where there's many parts in this new system, but it's a new system that you can use. So you're no longer going back to the riverbed, but you also know that and you understand your system so deeply that on the days where there might be a massive storm or a flood, you might go back to emotionally eating, and you may not have done that for 6 months or longer, but you know what's happening. You're like, okay, well, I'm really stressed at the moment. There's a storm in my life. There's a flood. The riverbed needed to be used, and that's okay. You can meet yourself with self-compassion, and these parts aren't in such extreme roles anymore, especially your inner critic, which is a big piece in the journey of healing emotional eating. Because the inner critic is the thing that can keep you stuck when it's constantly shaming you every time that you emotionally eat or you break your plan or whatever. And this isn't like forcing it. Like forcing it would be you literally standing in front of the river and saying, don't flow here, or trying to build a wall into the riverbed. If the river overflows, it's going to just push right past that or break the wall down eventually if there's enough water, if there's enough stress in your life. And this is why my 12-week release and reclaim exists. We're not fixing your food. We're meeting parts in your system that learn to survive by holding too much. And as I said before, there's many parts in this system. There's parts that are controlling. There's parts that are soothing you after a really hard day. There's parts that are avoiding. There's parts that are disappearing. Parts that are being helpful and holding too much. We work very gently and precisely with your very unique system to find out what's underneath that behavior. And this can be roles they've taken on. This can also be family dynamics that you're still holding, family roles that you're still holding, the load on your nervous system. When we release what was never ours to carry, which is such a beautiful part of IFS, then we can start to take away the things that food has been regulating until there's nothing left for food to regulate, because you have a new system in place. So if this has landed for you, I want you to just ask yourself something. What role did I play in my family? And am I still playing that role now? It might look different. It might have a cuter outfit. But are you still playing that role now? And then to follow on from that, how is food helping me cope with that? And there's no blame in that question, just information. This is just data. And for you to know that food is not your problem. It's often the last place that your system found relief. And when we stop fighting that and start listening to what's underneath it, something very different becomes possible. note, this podcast is for education and reflection only. It is not a substitute for therapy or healthcare. If this episode brought things up for you and you need support, please reach out to a trained therapy practitioner or health professional in your area. Thank you so much for listening. If this episode resonated, please follow or subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, or share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Megan Darnell Therapy. If you share the episode or want to let me know what landed for you, you're always welcome to message or tag me. I love hearing from you guys. Until next time, I'm Megan Darnell, and this is The Self-Led Woman.